At Sunday lunch, my mom dropped the bomb, "Your brother lost his job, so you'll be covering his bills for a while." My stomach sank. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I couldn't believe it. I've worked hard all my life, saving every penny, and now they expected me to bail Eli out again. He's my younger brother, but he's careless, always spending money on things he doesn't need. Mom, as usual, looked at me with those pleading eyes, acting like I was the only responsible one in the family. I swallowed my anger and decided to act smart. I didn't say no, but I started quietly checking the bills and bank statements. That's when I realized Eli had been lying. He had hidden money all along, pretending to be broke. Mom didn't know, or maybe she didn't care. I knew I had to show them the truth without losing my cool. I paid a few small bills while secretly tracking everything. When the right moment came, I confronted Eli. He tried to gaslight me, but I had proof. Mom couldn't argue anymore. Finally, I revealed everything at a family dinner. Calmly, I showed the hidden accounts and the lies. Their shocked faces were worth every sleepless night I spent planning. I made my choice, I wouldn't let anyone take advantage of me again. I cut ties with their financial games and focused on my life. Standing up for yourself isn't easy, but it's necessary. Betrayal hurts, but learning to protect yourself feels like freedom. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After working long hours and making sacrifices for years, they expected me to cover Eli's mess without question. My hands shook, and my chest felt tight with frustration. It wasn't just the money, it was the unfairness of it all. I had always been responsible, careful with my finances, and I prided myself on keeping things together. Meanwhile, Eli treated life like a game, never thinking about consequences. And now, my family assumed I would just step in and fix everything again. It made me feel invisible, like my efforts didn't matter. Anger bubbled inside me, but there was also hurt. Mom's eyes pleaded, guilt dripping from her words, making me question if I was overreacting. I wanted to scream, to tell them they couldn't keep taking advantage of me, but something inside me told me to stay calm. I sat there, trying to process it all, feeling a mix of resentment and disbelief. How could they expect me to carry their burden without even asking if I could? I realized this wasn't just about money, it was about respect and recognition. I had always been the one who held things together, and now they were treating me like it was my duty to fix their mistakes. In that moment, I decided I wouldn't just react blindly. I needed to think, to plan, and to protect myself. This wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I couldn't let their assumptions control my life. I took a deep breath, telling myself I would find a way to turn this around without losing my dignity. I soon discovered the full extent of Eli's carelessness. Bills I didn't know existed were piling up, some months unpaid, some forgotten entirely. He had been borrowing from friends, using credit cards recklessly, and spending on nights out I hadn't been told about. The more I learned, the more my stomach turned. Every lie he had told, every excuse he had made, felt like a personal attack. I had trusted him to be honest, to manage his own life, but instead, he hid his mistakes and expected me to clean up after him. It wasn't just money, it was the lack of responsibility, the constant disregard for anyone but himself. His parties, expensive hobbies, and careless spending were proof he had no intention of taking his life seriously. I felt betrayed not only as a sister but as someone who had always believed family meant supporting each other honestly. Anger mixed with disbelief as I realized the weight of his deception. Mom's casual expectation that I cover his debts suddenly made sense. It wasn't concern for him, it was entitlement. Eli had manipulated the situation, counting on me to act as his safety net. The frustration turned into a deep, burning sense of betrayal. How could someone so close to me act without thought, without honesty, and expect it to be acceptable? My patience thinned, replaced by determination. I knew I couldn't let this slide. It was time to face the truth, confront him, and make sure this pattern wouldn't continue. Linda looked at me with those familiar eyes, soft and pleading, and I felt the weight of her words before she even spoke. "You're the only one I can count on," she said, her voice trembling as if the burden of the family rested solely on me. I could feel the guilt creeping in, a familiar tug that made me question myself. She reminded me of all the sacrifices I had made, all the times I had put her and Eli first, painting a picture that if I refused, everything would fall apart. Her tone was gentle but sharp, designed to twist my emotions. Every glance, every sigh, felt like a silent accusation. She framed the situation as if responsibility was not just my duty but a moral obligation, making me second-guess my own feelings of frustration and betrayal. It was exhausting, the way she balanced care with subtle pressure, guilt with expectation. I realized this wasn't about fairness, it was about control. Mom had perfected the art of emotional manipulation, making it impossible to argue without feeling selfish or cruel. Even though my anger burned inside me, her words planted doubt. I had to remind myself that love didn't mean being taken for granted. Standing firm would be difficult, but I understood that giving in to her manipulation would only let this pattern continue. That Sunday, I saw clearly how the family had set me up, not just for Eli's mistakes, but for their reliance on me as the one who would always make things right, no matter the cost to myself. I realized I couldn't let this continue without taking control. I needed a plan, something quiet but effective. I started keeping track of every detail, bills, receipts, and transactions that showed exactly where Eli's money had gone. I paid close attention to patterns, noticing how certain expenses didn't add up and how Mom often turned a blind eye to his reckless behavior. It became clear that favoritism had allowed him to get away with things for years, and it was time someone held him accountable. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I watched silently, noting dates, amounts, and excuses, creating a complete picture of their carelessness. Each discovery added fuel to my determination. Every time Eli tried to downplay his spending or Mom tried to soften the situation, I quietly documented it. I wanted the truth in my hands, undeniable and clear, so there would be no way to twist the story later. This wasn't about revenge yet, it was about protecting myself and preparing for the moment when I would confront them. I needed certainty before I acted, a way to show them exactly what had been happening while keeping my position safe. With each note I made and every record I saved, I felt a sense of control returning. For the first time since that Sunday lunch, I wasn't just reacting, I was planning, and I knew I was building the foundation to finally set things right. I began going through everything carefully, line by line. Bank statements, old receipts, and unpaid bills all told a story Eli had tried to hide. The numbers didn't match his words, and it quickly became clear he hadn't been honest about his situation. The deeper I looked, the more I uncovered. There were accounts he had never mentioned, small deposits and transfers that proved he had money tucked away all along. Each discovery made my chest tighten with disbelief. It wasn't just the hidden funds, it was the pattern of deceit. Months of lies, excuses, and half-truths painted a picture of someone who counted on me to bail him out while he enjoyed life without responsibility. I felt a mix of shock and vindication. Finally, the evidence was in my hands, undeniable and complete. Eli's careful lies, once invisible, were now crystal clear. I kept my findings to myself, knowing this information was power. For the first time, I saw a way to take control of the situation without letting anyone manipulate me further. Every document, every figure, reinforced the truth: I had been misled, and now I had the proof to show exactly what had been going on. My frustration began to turn into resolve. I realized I wasn't powerless anymore. With this knowledge, I could confront Eli and Mom on my own terms, and I knew the moment of reckoning was approaching. I decided to play along, pretending to go along with their demands while keeping my own plan hidden. I paid a few of Eli's smaller bills, carefully timing each payment to appear cooperative. Every move I made, I watched their reactions closely. Mom's relief, Eli's casual gratitude, even the tiny smirks, they all told me more than words ever could. I needed to see how far they expected me to go before noticing I wasn't fully under their control. Each payment felt like a test, a way to measure their dependence on me. I could see Eli relaxing, assuming I would always be there to fix things, while Mom's eyes lingered on me, silently urging me to continue. The tension in the house was palpable. I stayed calm on the surface, smiling and nodding, but inside, I was taking careful notes of every expectation, every assumption they made. This act of compliance gave me time and insight. I learned where their boundaries were and how much they relied on my willingness to sacrifice. It also made me more confident in my next steps, knowing I was gathering information while appearing to submit. For the first time, I felt like I had control over the situation without revealing my hand. Every small bill I covered was part of a bigger plan, a way to prepare for the moment when truth and accountability would finally arrive. By the end of the week, I had a clear picture of their behavior, and I was ready to move from observation to action. The moment finally came. I calmly approached Eli, laying out the documents I had collected. His eyes widened for a split second, but then he smirked, trying to act like it was no big deal. "You're overreacting," he said, brushing it off, twisting every word to make me doubt myself. I could feel the frustration building, but I stayed composed, letting the proof speak louder than his excuses. Mom immediately jumped in, shielding him at first. "Clara, maybe you're reading too much into this," she said, her tone soft but protective. Her words stung more than Eli's denial. It felt like the two of them were teaming up against me, even when I knew the truth was on my side. Eli leaned back, confident I would falter. He laughed lightly, trying to make it seem like I was imagining the severity of his actions. Every attempt he made to shift blame only made my resolve stronger. I took a deep breath and continued, pointing to each statement, each hidden account, and every lie. My voice was steady, firm, leaving no room for argument. The tension in the room was unbearable. Mom's gaze wavered as she listened, her earlier support for him weakening under the weight of undeniable evidence. For the first time, Eli's smirk faltered. He realized this wasn't going to be another situation he could manipulate. I had taken control, and the confrontation was only beginning. By the end of our exchange, I knew the balance had shifted, and I was no longer just the sister being pushed around, I was the one holding the truth. While going through the financial records one evening, I stumbled upon something unexpected, a joint account linked to an old inheritance that had been largely forgotten. Most of the funds were untouched, and surprisingly, only I had full access to it. Suddenly, everything shifted. This wasn't just about covering Eli's mistakes anymore, it was a chance to take control of the situation in a way I hadn't imagined. The realization hit me hard, this loophole could change the balance of power in our family. I spent hours analyzing the details, tracing deposits and withdrawals, and understanding how much influence I could actually have. The more I learned, the more confident I became. This account wasn't just money, it was leverage, a tool to finally hold Eli accountable without putting myself at risk. The stakes had grown higher. Now it wasn't enough to show evidence, I could act decisively, using what was legally and rightfully mine to ensure fairness. Every step I took from that point forward would be deliberate and controlled. I also noticed patterns of neglect in how Mom had managed parts of the inheritance, confirming that she had never intended to address these funds responsibly. This reinforced my determination to act wisely and independently. For the first time, I felt the possibility of true empowerment. I wasn't just reacting to their manipulation or Eli's lies anymore, I had a strategic advantage, a way to reclaim control and shift the family dynamic entirely. That night, I made a decision, I would use this discovery carefully, turning the tables without unnecessary confrontation, and finally put the responsibility where it truly belonged. I chose a careful approach, one that wouldn't look harsh or emotional. I told them I would continue assisting, but only under clear conditions. Outwardly, it seemed like cooperation. In reality, every step was calculated. Using the access I had, I redirected funds in a way that protected my future instead of fixing Eli's chaos. Obligations tied to my name were cleared first, ensuring nothing could circle back to hurt me later. Each decision strengthened my independence while quietly exposing how unnecessary their demands truly were. Eli remained relaxed, convinced everything was handled. He never questioned why certain problems disappeared while others stayed unresolved. His confidence worked in my favor. Mom also seemed calmer, assuming the burden had shifted fully onto my shoulders again. Neither of them realized the truth unfolding beneath the surface. What made this satisfying wasn't punishment, it was clarity. Their stories no longer matched reality. Without confrontation, their false narrative began to collapse on its own. When requests increased, I responded with facts instead of emotion, forcing them to face limits they weren't used to hearing. I kept everything transparent on paper, organized, clean, and precise. No arguments, no raised voices, just undeniable results. The more structured I became, the more obvious their dishonesty looked. Slowly, dependence turned into discomfort. Eli started asking questions. Mom grew uneasy, sensing a shift she couldn't control. I stayed calm throughout, knowing every move had already been decided. This wasn't revenge fueled by anger. It was balance. I took back authority over my life without humiliating anyone, yet their lies lost power. They expected rescue. Instead, they were left facing responsibility. By choosing strategy over emotion, I reclaimed myself. I wasn't the family solution anymore. I was finally free from being used, and that freedom was the strongest response I could give. The day of the family dinner arrived, and I felt a strange mix of nerves and determination. I decided it was time to lay everything out in front of everyone, no dramatics, just facts. I started with a calm explanation, showing copies of bank records, receipts, and statements that tracked Eli's secret spending. Each document was placed carefully on the table, easy to read, impossible to deny. Their reactions were immediate. Eli's confident expression faltered, replaced by unease. Mom's mouth opened, then closed, as if she couldn't find words to defend him. The room grew silent, tension thick enough to touch. I spoke clearly, connecting the dots that revealed months of deception. Every hidden expense, every misrepresented debt, every untruthful excuse, all of it exposed. My voice remained steady, composed, because I wanted the focus on the evidence, not on anger. As I continued, shock rippled through the family. Faces turned pale. Eli's attempts to explain faltered under the weight of proof. Mom's earlier reassurances crumbled, leaving her speechless and embarrassed. It wasn't about humiliating them, but about making the truth undeniable. Seeing the disbelief in their eyes gave me a strange satisfaction, a quiet sense that justice, however simple, had been served. By the time I finished, the dynamic had shifted completely. I was no longer just a family member expected to fix everything. I had claimed my position as someone who could stand up, calmly and clearly, against manipulation. That evening marked a turning point. For the first time, honesty held the room, and I could feel a deep sense of relief settle over me. The lies had been exposed, and I finally felt in control. After that dinner, I knew things couldn't go back to the way they were. I made a decision for myself. I needed distance, space to breathe and rebuild my life on my own terms. I closed the accounts I had been managing for Eli and Mom, making sure I was no longer responsible for their debts or mistakes. The sense of relief was immediate, a weight lifting that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. I started planning my next steps carefully. Moving out seemed like the right choice, a fresh start where I could focus on my own goals without interference or expectation. I looked for a new apartment, organized my belongings, and created a space that felt entirely mine. It wasn't just about leaving, it was about reclaiming control over my decisions, finances, and daily life. I could finally make choices without guilt, without manipulation, and without the constant shadow of family demands. As I settled into my new routine, I felt a growing confidence. Each day brought reminders that I had stood up for myself and followed through. The independence was empowering, more valuable than any money or approval I had once sought from them. I realized that protecting myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. The toxic patterns that had drained me no longer had power. I could live fully, on my terms, without fear of being used again. By the time the weeks passed, I understood something important. Freedom wasn't just leaving behind obligations or people, it was choosing to value myself and my well-being above all else. That choice changed everything, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Looking back, I understand now that loyalty has limits, and love doesn't mean sacrificing your peace for someone else's mistakes. Family isn't measured by closeness alone, it's earned through honesty, trust, and mutual respect. The betrayal I experienced was painful, but it taught me a vital lesson: protecting yourself is never wrong. Walking away from manipulation and entitlement doesn't make you heartless, it shows strength and self-respect. I also learned that boundaries are essential. Without them, even the people you care about can take advantage, whether intentionally or not. Standing firm isn't easy, but it's necessary to preserve your dignity and independence. As I moved forward, I felt lighter, more confident, and finally in control of my own life. The sense of empowerment that came from taking responsibility for my choices and refusing to be used was unforgettable. I realized that true family support isn't about expecting sacrifices, it's about mutual care and respect. If those aren't present, it's okay to step back and protect yourself. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to defend your boundaries or stand up for yourself? I'd love to hear your experiences and thoughts. Share your story below, and let's remind each other that valuing ourselves is always worth it. Do you think I did the right thing by cutting ties and taking control, or should I have tried to help them again? I'm really curious about your thoughts, share them in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.